Thank you, Mario. Thank you, Chancellor Pellecchia, as well. And what I would like to do today is to reflect on the most recent wave of protest in Italy, in order also to point at the type of contributions that the peace movement can give, but also to the specific characteristics in terms of sociological development of the peace movement vis-à-vis other types of movements. And my main assumption shared by much of the literature on this field is that you have a very different moment in reflecting on the development of peace movement. One are moment of intense mobilization, in which the peace movement is at the core of coalitions of different forms of movement, type of organizations that bring in their own topic, and a time of instead low ebb, low visibility, in which the core organizations of the peace movement help the survival of the main issues of fighting against the war. So you have the periods of the big demonstrations, and you have the periods in which the peace movement continues to work, but more under the radar. What I'm looking at now is a moment that when we talked with Luciana Castellini about organizing reflections on the peace movement in Florence was not yet there, which is a moment of very high and visible mobilization, so that if we want to go back to other similar moments in times related with the peace movement, we think about the Vietnam War, we think about Yugoslavia, but here I think there are also some specific aspects. And the first one is a picture I took yesterday while thinking about this presentation. And it is interesting because it is one of the headquarters of the ANPI, the National Associations of the Partisans in Italy. And you can see the connections between the different flags. The peace flag, the first, the Palestinian flag, the second, and the Italian flag, which is listata lutto, which is symbolically listed in black to show the engagement with the protest. It is a moment in which we have always seen, read, and participated in this bridging of issues of war with issues of genocide, and the sort of internalizations of the issues of war, not as a topic for just expert or international relations scholars, but when war start to become part of domestic politics, both by the bridging that is done between different topics and by the type of involvement of different types of groups. Also, the presentation that you read mentioned how important is to bridge peace with women's studies, with environmental studies, with labor struggles, with reflections on what school and universities have to do. In fact, this is a topic that has been often reflected upon in research on the peace movement, the fact that peace organizations are always important at the core of this wave of protest against the war, but for much more than just stopping the war. And that in the moment of high mobilizations, the peace movement is an important contributor, but by far not the only one. So what we noticed when we studied the pro-Palestinian protests since October 2023 with Federica was that the typical organizations of the peace movement, also Pace Palestina, and so on, were relevant, but there was also a convergence of all the movements that were active. As two of the few scholars, David Meyer and John Marullo, who has worked on peace movement, have noted successful mobilizations rely on the cooptations of substantial resources from other movements, typically not involved in peace politics. So it's a moment in which different concerns are bridged. So it's not instrumental type of convergence, but different movements start to connect with the reality of war, genocide, and so on. The peace movement traditionally sees opportunities, but also challenges in this specific need. One is the need to find a common type of terrain, arena for very broad and diverse memberships, which sometimes bring about also conflicts about the forms of actions, the bridging of frames, but also the topic of how do you build coalitions. So who has the capacity to create new type of models, repertoires of actions, because for the peace movement also the differences between low ebb and high mobilizations means connections with other forms of movements. Mario was talking about effects in terms of bringing peace. What literature has observed is that very often peace movements in their peak fail to produce the policy outcomes that they are struggling for. There is a long stories of failures of very big demonstrations, millions in the street, but then nuclear power is implemented and wars are perpetrated up to genocides of entire populations and so on. It is the challenge more and more of finding political alliance. In the past, the assumption was the center-left movement, center-left governments are more open to peace. But what we see, for instance, today is a genocide that has been helped and supported by center-left governments. First of all, because the main complicit governments in the genocide have been, since the beginning, Biden in the United States and the Scholz government, SPD, Greens, and FDP in Germany. Starmer nowadays is another example of the fact that the center-left parties have often lost this capacity and the interest to support peace movements. Not all of them. Spain is a different case in point. But if you look at the positions taken on the Israeli genocide, what you see is that often center-right make center-left and center-right make less of an input than in the past. Nevertheless, there is a long-term cultural effect. For instance, after the Vietnam War, the ways in which wars have been made, the risk of defeats or getting involved by Western governments in long-term war, the risk in terms of developing strong forms of oppositions, losing face, and so on, have an effect, certainly a cultural effect, but also a generational effect. So often when you think about generations that in sociology are different than age cohort, but represent age cohorts in which specific experiences have been particularly relevant. You think about the 68 generations in which the Vietnam War was very important. And nowadays you see the very high mobilizations of the new generations that would almost following sociological reflections, we expect to continue to be engaged in this type of topic because it represented the acknowledgement that the type of values that were proclaimed when they were first socialized into Western cultures have been betrayed for the Vietnam Wars. It was the United States with the support of its allies, and for the Israeli genocide is the support of all Western countries, with very few exceptions. So what I want to point at with some reflections of the nowadays developments is the differences that emerge in intense time. And so I want to point at some element, the importance of agency. And I want to point, for instance, at the ways in which the mobilizations in Geneva for the preparations of the sailing of the global smooth flotilla vessels coming from Geneva have acted as a catalyzer of attention, bringing in a specific type of agencies that was not the one only of the peace organizations that were active also in Geneva very much, but much more related also with the symbolic and practical type of centrality which was acquired by the dockers, the workers of the harbor of Geneva. With this type of intensifications of the movements, what also emerges are some characteristics, say, for the development, some causal mechanism that are very different than in quiet times. So there is a low predictability. It's a moment which is exceptional. All the reactions during the strikes, general strikes, and the protest which follows by the activists themselves were pointed the unexpected mobilization. So there was an element which was not predicted because it was not the way in which it usually worked, because it was a moment of high emotional, extraordinary type of moment in which subjective reactions, which were not individual but collective, for instance, the role of the new generations. I met yesterday a friend who said that I was emotionally passionate by the ways in which my two sons have participated in this protest, not just following the parents, but bringing in some new elements. And this was in part present also in the previous stage of mobilizations, but was something new, this protagonism. Conjunctural event play a role. Also, for instance, think about the typical interactions in the street between this moment of intense mobilizations and reactions by the state, so the police. The activists didn't know what the police was going to do, also because it was quite new for the police to this type. And it was also a moment in which, with a high percentage of citizens, public opinion, even on the right, supporting the global smooth flotilla, the government, far-right government, was in a corner. Accelerated speed. So we saw this protest that didn't want to stop, that lasted the whole day and for days in an accelerations of time. So I want to use here a reflections that is related with some concepts that have developed in social movement studies. Protest cycles as moment of heightened attention. I will focus on the last few weeks, but since October 2023, there is a cycle of protest that we saw with peaks and low ebbs, but active and mobilized for a long time. A concept which is important to reflect upon is eventual temporalities. So the moment in which events are so strong that it broke the type of normal structural constraints on it. Moment of high repressions, moment of center right, more right than center, governments that is calling for repressions. International moment with Trump in power calling for brutal forms of repressions. But nevertheless, the type of mobilizations went beyond the type of constraints that also in social movement studies one would have considered as tendentially unhospitable for protest. This means also the development of some transformative events that, like the Genova case, work as a sort of catalyzers. Eventful protest is a concept that I have developed looking at other type of protest, that is their capacity to break structures and through develop a cognitive, emotional and relational type of mechanism that brings about this sudden peak in the mobilizations, this unexpected capacity for high mobilizations. And this is also something that we were studying with Marco, and is a type of protest that had roots in 5 years of organizations of the dockers in Geneva against the war. So before October 2023, there were already protests that referred to a traditional forms of actions by the peace movement, which was civil disobedience against the logistic aspect of the armament. So workers that call for stopping the transfer of arms and logistic materials helpful for arming a war or simply arming in general, and that do it by actions of civil disobedience. Not by chance, during the type of mobilizations, even in these very first days, what was pointed at was a traditions by the dockers. And one old activist, senior activist, reflected on another event on which there was an active memory during the Vietnam War, when another vessel left the harbor of Geneva to bring support to the Vietnamese people. With different characteristics, it was one vessel, but with a strong engagement, because the traveling lasted for a couple of months. What was interesting also, but I will not read all this, what is important in this catalyzing moment. We had seen with Marco that the workers of the dockers had been in contact with many organizations active in the peace movement, but also active in the student protest and activists on environmental issues and active on developmental issues. They had been in contact with other dockers in the harbor of Marseille, in the harbor of Barcelona, in the Piraeus, in Athens, and so on. But what happened with the creations of the idea, with the starting of the mobilizations on the global smooth flotilla, was that it was a convergence of the organized actors, but also of the population. So one element that has been often pointed at is that they collected 10 times the expected amount of help to be brought to Gaza. And this happened through mobilizations, which implied the convergence of people where this help was being collected, but also the participations in the march the day before the departure of the vessels for the Global Sumud Flotilla. And another important element is that together with the population, some important figures for the type of dynamics within the cities were also involved. You may have seen the video of the mayor of Genova participating in the first protest, singing song, and also giving a talk in which she referred to the tradition of Genova as the Medaglia d'Oro della Resistenza, golden medal of the Italian resistance to the Nazi fascists. At the same time, also the Catholic Church had an important role with even the participations to different initiatives of the Archbishop. So this meant that in a couple of days, first of all, the accusations instrumentally targeting the protest as anti-Semite became empty because the mayor and the archbishops were difficult to target and to put into this type of frame. But also it meant that the harbor, the dockers, the traditions of the dockers as peace actors emerged strongly. This, as I mentioned, was part of mobilizations that was going on in countries like Italy, in countries like Spain, less in other countries, but in general spreading in all Europe, that had prepared this mobilization. So it was sudden, transforming, but it was building upon this. And it was built upon different forms. I could talk forever about this type of peace movements. I want to focus on one element, which is how repertoires of actions were important in producing these intensifications. What we had seen also in the previous type of protest was the bridging, as it happens often in peace protest, of different type of traditions, both traditions of the peace movement and traditions of other type of actors that converge in the protest. Marches were there since the very beginning. In Italy, they were not massive, like in the UK, for instance, but they were very widespread, and Federica will talk about that. We have the boycott, which is a very central type of instruments for opposing wars, and which has the flexibility to be applied both by people, by us, everyone as consumers, but also to different type of activities, from sporting events. You may have followed the events in Udine in the last few days, to the artistic camp, with the Biennale di Venezia being a case in point in Italy. We had the camps that were imported in part by the United States, but already camps in solidarity with Palestine, but already there for a longer period. We had hunger strike, which was another forms of expressing, testify for the engagement of the people. And this is another type of actions in the traditions of violent protest. We had blockades And this is interesting because it was really a challenge against a turn in the Italian legislations that were oriented to target exactly those forms of protest that have been most used in the last few weeks. But also, I think what was important was the presence of flash mobs that were ongoing since the spring, late spring, and continued in the summer, making the protest even more rooted in all the small places, touristic or non-touristic, in which people started to do type of performances like the showing the flying of Palestinian flags, but also artistic performances and so on. And the general strikes, which I'm not completed my research yet, but maybe Mario is also as a long memory of the peace movement, can testify, is not normally used as an instrument of the fight against wars and genocide. And which characterized the Italian case with 3 general strikes in a couple of weeks. But we know that in Spain, there have been also similar type of mobilizations. And here, I wanted to reflect on these forms of actions in their capacity to create a momentum, in their capacity to trigger this type of transformations. In the summer, there was a campaign led by, what can I say, a group of intellectuals, but especially through the use also of social media, so with a specific form of mobilizations, the last day of Gaza, which I think had an important role in triggering political participations for Gaza, also by people who were not accustomed to go to a protest. So who could expose their position by using the everyday places of their life. In this day, I went around just in my neighborhood and I saw these white drops that were a symbol for support for Gaza, really everywhere, very widespread. Even, for instance, in shop windows, and even bridged with slogans in some cases, and in other cases also with the Palestinian flag. Another illustrations of how protest sensitized also those who were not already involved in social movements for peace is the broad boycott that happened on sport issues. So the ways in which the issues of peace was also bridged with a sort of ethic of the sport. You don't play with the genocide, and the red cards has been a form of participations that had, for instance, mobilized soccer supporters, but not only soccer, also supporters in different type of sports. This was a moment that intersected, so broad participations, mass participations with this potential for empowering citizens in their everyday life and everyday experiences, interacted with what I called yesterday, so I'm not sure I will keep these definitions, but connective type of actions, in the sense that they have been rooted within specific professions, specific arenas, in which the issues of oppositions to the genocide became central also to create connections within professions themselves. There are many examples, but I want to cite especially 3. So one is the camps in the spring of 2024, and probably Federica will talk a bit about this. They were a form of actions that illuminated especially the type of complicity of universities, and opposed the complicity of universities with the Israeli genocide by knowledge building and by reflections also on what universities have to be, of the type of deteriorations of the ethical issues in universities that were more and more connected with wars and genocides, and with private groups like Leonardo, who has been exposed as. The other events, which was in August, September, which I found also interesting and effective in terms of this spreading within a profession, has been the hunger strike of the health workers in a huge number of presidi sanitari, of hospitals and health centers, with also this capacity to connect the different actors who participated. I've been collecting these pictures, and really there are places I've never heard of. So in each small places, sometimes also with the support of the professional orders, of the nurses, or even of the medical doctors, you had this day of mobilizations that then was repeated with other forms. This was, I am in hunger strikes against the genocide. And finally, another example is this mobilizations of the dockers that had been there for a while, but that started to be connected already before Genova, based on the knowledge that to break the logistics environment for a genocide, you need to involve workers of different countries. That had been traditions for the workers. Then the specific global Sumud flotilla, which I think also helped these intensifications before some specific characteristics in the constructions of a repertoire of actions. The global Sumud flotilla was not the first flotillas, there were several also before, but I think was effective in mobilizing different actors through several choices. The choices of small vessels, which helped a type of also images that was connecting very much with children that were the main victims of wars and genocide, but also showed a non-aggressive type of attitudes. It was a type of mobilizations that reminded me of the Freedom Summer in the United States in 1964, when activists from the northern states of the United States went to the south to register Black voters. They incurred in very heavy repressions, very heavy risk, but they did it based on the perceptions that you can use your privilege. That is also the attentions that focuses on some of these activists to promote an idea. So as Greta mentioned, putting your privilege at the service of others. And this was done also showing the multiplicity from the nephew of Mandela participating in the protest to artists, but also politicians. And I think this had an impact on that logic of alliances. It was an action of testimonies by a small group of courageous activists They refused definitions like heroes, but the type of engagement and commitment risk they took was really high. But it was not only them. So I think this was important, the fact that since the very beginning, they said the global Sumud flotilla is not just those who are on board, but also those who constitute the ground crew. So the flotilla di terra, and this implied in this flotilla, in the next flotilla that follow the global Sumud flotilla few days later, also the fact that people could show their support. And a main slogan by the dockers, blocchiamo tutto, was, I think, also a very important moment in involving also those who were not on board in this type of. And the route. So the fact that through this slow motion, from Genova to Catania, my home city, the passage of the ships, of the vessels, mobilized people. In Catania, it was the biggest demonstrations ever. I've been there in June, and there have been protests, but no expectations of tens of thousands of people mobilizing in the street of Catania, including people in my own family that had never been politicized, and for whom this type of experiences was the first of them. Also, with this idea of the ground crew, the Global Sumud Flotilla helped type of initiatives that really spread very well, because my impression was activists in different locations were thinking, how do we implement a slogan like blocchiamo tutto? And the answer was through different forms, through of boycotts, of networks of restaurants, networks of cinemas that all thought about how to block. And blocking happened in the harbors, but also occupations. I think it was the first time in many, many decades that even the Scuola Normale Superiore was occupied. And it was a spontaneous move that also broke rules, gave such an empowerment in this moment that when I went back to vote in an occupied school, I found just a sign saying, given the student occupations for Gaza, the election booth have been moved somewhere else. So, which gave me the impression something different from normalcy is happening. And the general strikes. That, I think, has implied, first of all, a move towards a type of convergence, also in the range of a couple of weeks, what were two separate strikes by the CGL, the main Italian union, and by the grassroots trade unions were combined in a moment in which it was important that it was a general strikes, but it was much more than a general strikes, because it implied also a broad convergence in which other actors dominated the scenes and also decided about the type of instruments to use. And the blocking of harbors, blocking of highways, blocking of railway stations like in Florence was an important sign of these transformations of the general strike, almost in a Rosa Luxemburg type of perspective. The mobilizations that is dense also with consequences for the future. That is not spontaneous, but that it takes a different type of dynamics, giving the participations from below. So, very 3 minutes. Okay. I think that what we can reflect upon is how there was an organizational convergence of different groups that also developed in different ways, in different moments of the protest, in the different peaks. There was a frame bridging that is typical of the peace movement, so where issues of war are related with issues of patriarchy. The feminist movement had mobilized in these last 2 days for the women in Gaza. The environmental destructions introduced and produced by war and genocide, and so also the reflections on the ecocide, the destructions of educations and freedom of academic freedom, not only in Gaza, but also for us, the involvement of reflections about what educations, what labor should do, what is the ethic that these in different professions must be reflected upon. What the freedom of press means, fighting for freedoms of press within wars that are traditionally not hospitable, but in this case even more so, with the death of more journalists at the hands of Israel than in any type of war in the past. I think the slogans and the type of images that come from this protest of the last intensified moment is aiming at showing how each and everyone is participating in the struggles against the genocide, because it is something that affects all of us. So it is a convergence against the war and for peace, but there is also a much broader type of reflections on the ways in which it is not solidarity with something away, but it is something that touch us directly. And in fact, and I finish with this, I think that one of the emerged and remain from these intensifications of time is the idea expressed in the first post. Volevamo liberare la Palestina, invece la Palestina sta liberando noi. We wanted to free Palestine, and instead Palestine is freeing us. Or the bus with Gaza, the many written on it, the many flags are pointing at the fact that in a moment of intensifications and of a protest in which the peace movement had played an important role, but was not the only one. What is at stake is also the ways in which we think about our own work, everyday life, human rights, and so on.